we're talking about strategies to help you overcome that. Now, any good strategy comes first with a proactive strategy, right? So what do we do first? What we want to talk about is what you can do to prevent the problem in the first place. Now, in my opinion, one of the best things that you can do is minimize eating out. And I know the temptation is going to be there for many of you, but if you minimize eating out, you'll stay away from a lot of the cross-contamination and you'll stay a lot away from the accidental gluten. But if you're going to eat out, one of the things that I would encourage you to do, and depending on where you go, I like to bring some of my own food. Now, if that's not an option in that regard, eat before you go out, and that way you're not having to choose as much. And this is a big one for me because a lot of times I'll eat the bulk of my meal before I go out and visit with friends or a business lunch or whatever it might be in your case. But I'll eat before I go, and that way when I go, I don't have to worry about a huge meal. I can get something very small, and sometimes nothing at all. I'll just get me something to drink, and then just meet with the person. So, eat before you go out is definitely an option. It's one that's very proactive. Now, as far as bringing your own food goes, this is going to be more if you're visiting other people's homes. And so some of you might be looking, kind of frowning and thinking, there's no way, I'm not going to bring my own food. Well, this advice here kind of goes hand in hand with this bullet down here, which is communicate with your loved ones. And so you can't just show up at somebody's house with all of your own food after they've slaved away in the kitchen to prepare a meal for you and not let them know that you're going to bring food. Like, that's considered to be rude, and so you want to communicate first. And the way I like to communicate this is, hey, I'm coming. Like if it's your grandma, if it's your aunt or uncle, or if it's a relative, you just call them up and say, look, you know how much I love your cooking and your food, but I'm on a special diet, and I have to be very diligent about it, and there's just no way that I can expect you to accommodate for me. So I'm going to be bringing some of my own food. I just don't want you to take offense to that, but I wanted to give you a heads up because I don't want you to try to, turn over the entire kitchen to try to accommodate for my special need. And so in that way, you're letting them know before you go that you're going to be bringing some things, and that this way they're not offended if you don't choose to eat some of the foods. And so again, it's important to have that communication, to have that conversation if you're traveling to somebody else's home. Otherwise, you're just being a rude guest, and that won't fly very well either. Now, if you're eating out, again, you can eat before you go, but you can also investigate the restaurant before you go, which is one of the issues I've seen a lot of people struggle with. Is when they get to the restaurant, they have no idea what the menu is, and so then they feel overwhelmed, and they feel, in a sense, they feel like they have to pin down the waiter or the waitress to get them to kind of walk through everything and make sure there's no gluten. So do your investigation before you go. If you do a little research about the restaurant you intend on going to, you can figure out what their menu is, whether or not they do offer gluten-free options. You can even call ahead of time just to ask any other kinds of specific questions. And that way, when you get there, you don't have to be the one that's holding up the order for everybody else. You don't have to be the one that feels like everybody's eyeballs are on you because you're ordering something different or special. So again, investigate that restaurant's menu and maybe even potentially call them before you go. That way you can get a better understanding of what you can order and maintain that sense of normalcy. Now, in addition to that, one of the best proactive strategies is taking Gluten Shield. Now, if you don't know what Gluten Shield is, it's a proteolytic enzyme that contains a spectrum of enzymes, many of which help to degrade gluten proteins, so that if you do get cross-contamination or accidental exposure, you've got something there to catch it and help break it down to potentially minimize your risk. Now, some of you, and there are some companies that make enzyme products for people with gluten sensitivity, and they're claiming that if you use their product, that you won't get there's zero risk of gluten exposure, and they're liars. Don't listen to that. Remember that. And even with Gluten Shield is not designed to allow you to eat gluten. It's designed to protect you from small amounts that you could get cross-contamination from. So don't think that this is a catch-all and that if you take it, you can go eat the bread rolls that are laid out on the dinner table. So again, taking that proactively before you go or as you're there 10 minutes before you eat can also, go a long way to protecting you. But these other strategies really preventatively, if you're trying to not get gluten during the holiday season or really any time when you go out, you want to definitely make sure you get used to those and put those on your habit list. Now, one of the other, fundamental questions that comes up is if I do get glutened, what's that process look like? So some are more sensitive than others. So one of the things I think it's also important to understand is your digestive transit time. When you're talking about getting gluten exposure, if you look at the total time that it takes for food to pass from your mouth to your anus, you're looking at anywhere, depending on the person, from 39 to 52 hours. If we look up, further up north, we've got 2.5 to 3 hours. It takes 50% of the 2.5 to 3 hours for 50% of the stomach contents to be emptied, and about 5 hours for the total stomach emptying. And then we have this transit time of 2 to 3 hours going through the small intestine, and then another 30 to 40 hours going through the colon. So again, that summarizes or totals, anywhere from 39 to 52 hours. And that again is influenced by a variety of different components. And so one of them is different types of food. Some food is easier digested by some than others, and you have to keep that in consideration. Stress dramatically can reduce transit time. Chronic stress, those of you struggling with chronic constipation issues, you've got to really keep this in mind. Your transit time might be much, much slower. So getting gluten, that gluten might stick with you and stay with you a lot longer. Of course, gender you can't change, although in today's society some would believe that you can. Exercise can definitely improve your transit time in the long haul, and then proper sleep and hydration as well. So these things that can influence the speed at which food traverses from your mouth to your anus. And so if you get gluten, if gluten comes in through that meal, it's got to make that trek or that journey. In best case scenario, we're talking about this length of time. So there are different strategies if you do get gluten that we can speed up this transit time process and get it out of you. But I think it's also important to remember it's not just about getting it out of you, because gluten creates an antibody response. And the problem with that is if you get gluten and your immune system starts generating antibodies, the half-life of an antibody against gluten is 2 to 3 months. And so why is that important? It's because the antigen-antibody complex that forms when you get exposure to gluten, that antibody-antigen complex, it takes 2 to 3 months for half of it to go away. And so in that 2 to 3 month time frame, that's inflammation that's being triggered inside of you, whether it's in your GI tract or whether it's in your systemic circulation. And so this is really, in my opinion, the most dangerous part, whereas the acute exposure of your GI tract lining to gluten, again, we can get rid of that relatively quickly, but it's this here that is the most dangerous part. So keeping those things in mind, let's talk about the strategies to incorporate to overcome. So let's say you're doing everything right, you go to a restaurant, somebody goofs up, you get the wrong meal, you get the wrong food, it's highly contaminated with gluten, you get exposure. So in my experience, one of the number one things you can do is you can flush out your bowel. And I've talked about this a lot. So if we look up here, number one is flush out the bowel. And how do we do a bowel flush? So this is a lot like doing a colonoscopy prep. When you get ready to go to the doctor to do a colonoscopy, they give you this drink, and it's an osmotic laxative, and it pulls water into your bowel and helps flush them out. Well, vitamin C can do this as well very, very effectively. And what I like about vitamin C is, number one, there are really no side effects. It's not going to damage you by using vitamin C to perform a flush. Number two, vitamin C supports immune system function. And there's some research that shows that vitamin C repairs colon cell damage caused by gluten, and that's why another reason why I like vitamin C for this option. But the other thing that vitamin C does is a very powerful anti-inflammatory, and it helps fuel your immune cells. So it's going to prime and fuel your immune cells and support them in that fight against the gluten antibodies. And so how do we do a vitamin C flush? It's very, very simple. You want to use a powder. Ideally, not pills, because if you're using pills, you're just going to stack pills up in your GI tract, and if you don't break down capsules very well, the flush isn't going to go very well for you. So a pre-broken down powder is the best thing to use. You also have to make sure that the vitamin C powder that you use is not a corn-based vitamin C. A lot of them are. They're made out of corn, and so you'd want to avoid that because, again, those of you that follow No Grain, No Pain, you're avoiding corn, not just wheat, barley, and rye. You're also avoiding corn. So a corn-free vitamin C powder, and the way you want to do this, it's 6 grams mixed in 3 ounces of water every 15 minutes. So 6 grams, which is equivalent to, again, 6,000 milligrams if you're looking at the dosing, and mixed in 3 ounces of water. So you should take that powder, mix it in 3 ounces of water, stir it really well. If you're using something like Detox C, you want to make sure that fizz dies down, that effervescence dies down, otherwise you'll get really gassy as you go through this process. But stir it really well and drink it, and you're going to drink that amount every 15 minutes until your bowels start moving and flushing. And then it'll run its course. And for most people, a flush like this takes anywhere from 2 to 5 hours, sometimes a little bit longer to do. And so it's a good idea if you do a flush after gluten exposure, ideally you do it at home where you're close to the bathroom, where you're not at work, right? Or you're not in the car having to go somewhere, because you will need the bathroom, and when you need it, you'll need it fast. So again, this will help flush the bowel out. In essence, by flushing that bowel out, anything that's in you that you ate, it accelerates that 39 to 52 hour transit time and gets it right out of you, and potentially reduces the immune system's interaction with that gluten. And so again, one of the best things that you can do immediately after. Okay, now the other thing that you can do, let's say you night before you went out and you got glutened, and maybe you want to do a flush, but then after the flush is over, consider fasting for a longer period of time. And so what I have seen be effective for people is 24-hour plus fast. Why do we do that? Because after you cleanse out the bowel, you want to give it time to heal and repair and rest. And so when you get into that fast, once you get to that 24-hour mark, you're going to actually create apoptosis, which is the cells that are damaged are going to basically kill themselves, commit suicide, so then new cells can be made, new fresh cells that aren't damaged. And so you consider that fast as a quicker way to stimulate healing and repair. It can be very, very effective. And so I've seen people do very easily, again, it's different if you're diabetic. So again, if you're diabetic, you have major blood sugar problems, this may not be the right strategy for you. But if you aren't, this can be a fantastic strategy, but anywhere from a 1 day to a 3 day, up to 3 days. But 1 day in my experience is generally enough to really help a person overcome a good gluten exposure. The other things that we do on the flip side of that is we support the microbiome by using probiotics. One of the things that happens when you get gluten, and this has been shown in research studies, is gluten affects certain types of bacteria. And some researchers believe that it's because gluten's impact on the microbiome is one of the reasons why so many people have different types of side effects. And so you can help rebalance the microbiome with several different strategies. Number one, take a good quality probiotic. I recommend Biotic Defense, or Ultrabiotic Defense in this case. It was actually designed for people trying to come off of gluten. It was designed, the species were picked for that. The different types of probiotic species were picked specifically for that. But the other thing that you can do is introduce, after your fast is over, is introduce high quality fermented foods that are rich in different and diverse bacteria. And so one of my favorites is sauerkraut, which is a fermented cabbage. And I'm really a bigger fan of the fermented vegetables versus, say, fermented dairy products, just because so many people with gluten issues or gluten reactivity have problems with dairy and don't do well with dairy either. So, I wouldn't, in this situation, use something like yogurt. I'd more specifically use something like fermented sauerkraut or fermented cabbage, fermented carrots, fermented cauliflower, those types of things. Again, the vegetables can be very effective, fermented vegetables. The other thing that's interesting, and this you should be doing if you have the opportunity to do it, you should be doing anyway. And that's getting your hands dirty, getting your hands in the dirt, in the soil. If you have a garden, this is perfect. Their researchers are now studying the microbiomes of people that own gardens and that are in their gardens getting their hands in the dirt on a frequent basis. And what they're finding is those individuals have far more robust and diverse microbiomes. And that gives you a level up. That gives you an edge of resiliency as it comes to being glutened in the first place, because a healthy microbiome will support you if you do get glutened. So you want to go into, again, the opportunity or possible potential being glutened. You'd like to go into that scenario with an already robust microbiome that can help you and help defend you. And then, as I mentioned earlier, support and digestion. And this is when you damage your GI tract, and it's, after you've been glutened, that GI tract is damaged. There's inflammation that can occur. And so supporting your body with digestive enzymes after the fact can be helpful. And so again, especially a gluten busting enzyme, that can be helpful to break down the gluten, but also a broad spectrum digestive enzyme, because that can be helpful if that gluten has damaged your intestines. Again, it's affecting your digestion moving forward. It can be helpful for you to start breaking your food down a little bit better so you can get better nourishment out of the next few meals. So supporting that digestion is very, very key. And so it's not even just digestive enzymes here. This could also be using acid, like for example, betaine hydrochloride. We have something at Gluten-free Society called ultra acid, which can be helpful in this situation. But also, if you don't have a gallbladder, you might consider bile acid as a supplemental as well, and that's digestion support. So again, you've got multiple different options here. Acid to support the stomach, bile acid to support the gallbladder, the liver, and then digestive enzymes to support the digestion and breakdown of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins within the GI tract after the gut gets damaged. We also know that adequate sleep becomes a very, very important part of the healing process. And so what happens when you get glutened is that will activate the sympathetic nervous system, which is what it's also sometimes referred to as fight or flight. And you don't want the sympathetic nervous system in full mode activation when you're damaged. Your body, ideally wants to activate parasympathetic, and that's part of how we heal, repair, sleep, and digest better. So again, gluten can activate that sympathetic. And so if you do get gluten, one of the best things you can do too, again, with all these strategies, is just make sure you go to bed and get a good night's sleep and let your body heal and repair and rest. And hopefully with this, remember, sleeping resets the circadian rhythm, and it sets you up for the next morning for a really healthy poop. Right? Because ultimately we want to eliminate the gluten. We want to get it out of us as quickly as possible. So if you're not following this flushing strategy, again, and maybe you're doing some of these other things, you do want to make sure it comes out of you, because some people gluten constipates. And I have people that have come to see me where they get glutened and they're constipated for the next 3 or 4 days. They don't have a bowel movement, and that gluten just stays in their intestine, and because they're not having a bowel movement, it's just creating and wreaking more and more havoc. So again, this goes back to get a poop out of you, have a bowel movement as quickly as you can after being glutened. So that's going to help ensure that you're flushing out whatever exposure that you got to minimize the potential for that damage to occur. Okay, and then the last strategy here is to get educated. So many people, they know they should be gluten-free, but they're not quite sure how to go, gluten-free as far as the diet's concerned, and they're not even really sure what gluten is. Most of the world looks at gluten as wheat, barley, and rye, but the vast majority of people continue to eat other grains that contain other forms of gluten that can do damage. Those grains like corn and rice and even oat. And so get educated and know what gluten is. And one of the things, we'll put a link down below to the master class. If you haven't taken it, it's absolutely free. It doesn't cost you anything. It's called the Glutenology Master Class. And it's a 5-day class, walking you through everything you should know about not only going gluten-free, not only, how to go gluten-free, but the symptoms of gluten exposure. We also talk about how to navigate social situations in depth. We talk about gluten-free alcohols. We talk about the habits that you need to start manifesting to make sure that you don't get gluten exposure, how to find hidden gluten and cross-contamination, foods that mimic gluten, drugs that emulate or also can contribute to gluten-like damage. So the class is very robust, and so if you haven't taken it, make sure you get signed up for that, because one of the best forms of prevention is an education. Get yourself prepared by knowing what you should be doing preventatively as opposed to being reactive in the moment. Now, we're all going to get a time where we do get glutened and we have to be reactive, but we can reduce those frequencies by understanding and knowing what to do before time. So that's it. If you get gluten, we'll back up, you flush out the bowel, you fast, you support the microbiome, possibly with good probiotic, you support digestion with enzymes and acids, and you get plenty of sleep so you can have a healthy bowel movement, get that bowel moving in the morning, and you educate yourself. And if you stick to those habits, you will not have a problem with gluten in your future, and it'll be a breeze. So hope that's helpful for you. We'll see you in the next segment.